The morning started like any other. A sharp navy suit, freshly pressed, a leather briefcase zipped tight, and a single cup of black coffee from the corner shop where the barista already knew his name, Marcus. No cream, no sugar, extra napkin. It was Thursday. The air was crisp, and Marcus Talley, Assistant United States Attorney, had a closing argument to deliver by 10 a.m. He was calm, he always was. Years of courtroom rhythm had trained him to hold silence with authority. His walk was measured, his face unreadable, and when he slid behind the wheel of his black Lexus, the city hardly noticed him. Just another man on his way to work. Except he wasn't just another man. And within 8 minutes, the city would notice. The coffee steamed gently in his cup holder. The courthouse was 15 blocks away. He queued up a podcast about a Supreme Court decision and merged into light traffic. Then came the lights. Blue. Flashing. He blinked once, then checked the mirror. A cruiser behind him. No siren, just presence. Marcus signaled. Pulled over. Turned down the volume. The officer approached fast, posture stiff, hand hovering too close to his belt. Marcus rolled down the window and spoke first. "Morning, officer." "Something wrong?" The cop didn't answer. "License and registration," he barked, scanning the car like it was a threat. Marcus kept his voice even. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" The officer leaned in, eyes narrow. "Suspicious vehicle. You match a description." Marcus tilted his head, puzzled. Of what, exactly? But the question didn't land. Instead, the officer's voice rose. "Out of the car. Now." The moment cracked. Not with violence. With inevitability. Because Marcus had seen this scene before. He just never thought he'd be the one in the suit on the sidewalk. Marcus stepped out slowly. No sudden moves. No pointed words. His hands were visible, palms forward. His briefcase still sat on the passenger seat, unopened. The officer didn't ask questions, he issued commands. "Hands on the hood. Spread your feet." Marcus obeyed. Because it wasn't about fear. It was about control. And Marcus knew that in this moment, nothing, not his Ivy League law degree, not his years at the Department of Justice, not even the quiet respect he commanded in court, would shield him from what came next. The cuffs snapped cold around his wrists. Too tight. Too fast. "Am I under arrest?" he asked. "You're being detained," the officer said. "Pending identification." "I have identification in my breast pocket." The officer didn't care. "You can tell it to booking." Across the street, a woman paused at the bus stop. Her eyes widened. She pulled out her phone and started recording. Marcus stood, cuffed, against the hood of his own car while the officer radioed in a vague report. Possible suspect in earlier incident. Blackmail, dark suit, black Lexus. That's all it took. A suit became a uniform. A car became suspicious. A man became a maybe. Marcus looked straight ahead, his jaw set, his breath even. He'd spoken to grand juries. He'd put men behind bars for corruption. He'd argued before the circuit court just last month. But here on this sidewalk, he was just another silhouette under suspicion. He didn't speak again. Didn't plead. He waited. Because the truth always comes. Not always when you need it, but always when someone makes the mistake of thinking it can be ignored. And as the officer reached into his pocket to retrieve a wallet, a small badge slipped from the leather fold and landed at their feet. Gold. Federal. The letters clear as day. Department of Justice. For a moment, the world narrowed to a single object on the sidewalk. The badge. A glint of metal in the morning sun, framed by dust and disbelief. The officer's face shifted, just slightly. Not with shame. Not yet. But with calculation. His jaw tightened. His eyes darted between the badge and Marcus's expressionless face. He picked it up slowly. Turned it over. Read the lettering again. U.S. Department of Justice. Assistant United States Attorney. Marcus D. Talley. The badge was real. And the silence was louder than sirens. Marcus said nothing. He didn't have to. The officer cleared his throat, as if summoning some script that didn't exist for this scenario. "I didn't realize." Still cuffed, Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You didn't ask." The officer's voice dropped. "I thought." "You assumed," Marcus interrupted. "Based on what?" The question lingered like smoke. A crowd had started to gather now. More phones. More murmurs. A man in construction boots muttered, "Oh, they messed up bad." The woman from the bus stop was still filming, her eyes wide. "He's a federal prosecutor," she whispered to no one in particular. They cuffed a federal prosecutor. The officer reached for his keys, his hands trembling now. "Let me get these off, eh?" No, Marcus said calmly. Leave them. The cop froze. You sure? Marcus nodded once. Let them see. And so he stood, hands behind his back, while the officer tried to act as though the moment could be salvaged. A second cruiser pulled up. An older officer stepped out, already looking tense. He saw the cuffs. He saw the badge. And then he saw Marcus. Sir, the officer began. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He only said, Call your captain. For words. Soft. Deadly. And 4 minutes later, the city would erupt. The captain arrived in 7 minutes. 3 squad cars, 1 unmarked sedan, and a crowd now thick enough to block the sidewalk. Marcus still stood in cuffs. Still silent. Still composed. The badge, his badge, had been picked up, wiped clean, and now rested on the hood of his own car. The younger officer stood a few feet away, trying and failing to avoid the cameras. The older officer who had arrived second stood frozen by the cruiser door, headset dangling, mouth slightly open like he'd stumbled into the middle of a courtroom he wasn't trained to enter. Then came Captain Elias. Late 50s. Gray at the temples. Chest puffed out with a confidence that had clearly been earned in quieter decades, before every action was live-streamed. He spotted the cuffs first, then Marcus, then the badge. And when recognition set in, the blood drained from his face. Mr. Talley, he said, too loudly. Sir, there's been a... Don't, Marcus said. Calm. I see. Elias stopped mid-sentence. Marcus continued, You cuffed a federal prosecutor without ID check. Without reading rights. In public. On camera. Do not call it a misunderstanding. Elias swallowed hard. I wasn't informed. That's not my concern. The crowd watched, hushed now. Phones caught every blink, every shift of breath. A small child tugged on their mother's coat. Mom, what's happening? She whispered back, Justice. Maybe. The captain stepped forward with the key. Please, allow me. Marcus extended his hands without a word. The cuffs clicked open. Metal against metal. He flexed his fingers, rolled his wrists, then reached for the badge. He picked it up slowly. Not like a shield. Like a mirror. You know who I am now, he said, pinning the badge to his belt. But the real question is, who would I have been if I wasn't? And no one had an answer. The precinct tried to bury it. They offered coffee. They offered car service. They even offered to personally escort Mr. Talley to court, like a peace offering tied up with blue lights and whispered regret. Marcus refused it all. He drove himself. Same car. Same seat. Same coffee, now lukewarm. The only difference was the ache in his wrists and the heat in his chest. He arrived at the courthouse 5 minutes before his hearing. Security didn't stop him, didn't need to. Everyone knew who he was now. The clip had already hit 500,000 views. News anchors were parsing the footage frame by frame. DOJ prosecutor wrongfully arrested was trending on every platform. Marcus stepped into the courtroom. Same suit. Same silence. But something had shifted. He could feel it in the air, the tight attention, the way even the judge's eyes lingered a little longer when he rose to speak. His closing argument wasn't meant to be poetic, but it became something more. He spoke not just of the facts in the case, but of the weight of assumption. The ease with which systems forget humanity. The razor's edge between dignity and danger when the wrong person sees you through the wrong lens. He finished with a line that hadn't been in his notes. This morning, I was a suspect. This afternoon, I am your prosecutor. Same man. The difference? Only perception. And that, Your Honor, is what bias looks like at scale. The jury watched him leave like they'd just seen something holy. Back in his chambers, the presiding judge called him in. Older man, bench for 30 years. He didn't offer sympathy. Just a sentence Marcus wouldn't forget. You just changed the conversation, son. Not just in court. In this country. By the next morning, the silence from the department was deafening. No press conference. No public apology. Just a single sentence buried at the bottom of a press release. An internal review is underway regarding an officer-initiated stop involving a federal employee. The internet wasn't satisfied. The video had crossed 2 million views. Civil rights groups had begun issuing statements. Law professors weighed in. Commentators on morning shows said what many feared to say out loud. If a federal prosecutor can be cuffed like that, who can't? Marcus said nothing. Not yet. He sat in his apartment that morning, blinds half closed, suit jacket draped over the arm of a chair. On the table, the same badge, the same wallet. A note from his assistant with the words, CNN and MSNBC want interviews. NAACP too. Call back. He didn't. Instead, he opened his laptop and began writing. Not a complaint. A statement. Measured. Sharp. Surgical. He titled it, "What I Wore Meant Nothing." The essay was quiet. He didn't rage. He simply described what it felt like to be dehumanized in real time, while wearing the symbols society said would protect him. I was dressed for court. But to one man, I was dressed for suspicion. He ended with a question. How many others have been silenced simply because they didn't drop a badge when the wallet hit the ground? He submitted it to a few national outlets. They published it within the hour. Within 6, it had been read aloud on the Senate floor. By noon, students in 3 cities had printed it for class. And Marcus? He stayed home. Let the words walk without him. Because truth, when delivered plainly, is louder than outrage, and more enduring than fear. The ripple spread fast. Law schools assigned the essay. Professors paused lectures to read it aloud. In one Philadelphia classroom, a student raised her hand with tears in her eyes and asked, "Why do we have to wear power to be protected?" In Washington, a senator folded the article neatly and placed it on the desk of a Justice Committee chair. "You see this," she said. "This is what unchecked assumptions cost." But not everyone was ready to listen. The precinct still hadn't named the officer, still hadn't answered questions about body cam footage, or why Marcus was booked even after credentials were visible. Their silence wasn't strategy. It was fear. Because behind the badge that fell onto the pavement that morning wasn't just a man, it was a mirror. And across the country, people were being forced to look. At lunch that day, Marcus walked into a cafe near the courthouse. Heads turned. One man in line whispered to his coworker, "That's him. That's the guy." The barista offered him coffee on the house. "It's the least we can do," she said. He thanked her politely, took his cup, and sat by the window. Outside, a police cruiser idled. Inside, a teenage boy walked up to him shaky, nervous. "You wrote that essay?" Marcus nodded. "I just wanted to say, I'm thinking about going into law now. Because of that." Marcus smiled. "Then go. But don't go in to defend yourself. Go in to change the rules." That night, he received a message from an anonymous officer. "We all knew who you were by the time you got to holding. Some of us didn't sleep that night." Marcus didn't reply. He just archived the message and added it to a growing folder labeled Unsaid Confessions. A week passed. The city was still buzzing, but Marcus kept moving quietly. No press tour. No interviews. He returned to his office, briefed his team, reviewed caseloads, business as usual. But nothing felt usual. Not after what had happened. Not after what was still happening to others. He started receiving letters. Dozens. Then hundreds. Most handwritten. Folded into envelopes with no return addresses. A grandmother in Tulsa wrote, "My grandson was arrested walking home from work. He had no badge to drop." A high school teacher in Oakland sent a classroom photo and a note. "We read your words. They understood something I couldn't explain until now." One letter, in plain black ink, simply read, "You made it out. Please don't forget those of us who didn't." He didn't. Marcus took every letter and placed them into 3 boxes labeled with a single word. Read. Remembered. Responding. Then one morning, something else arrived. A formal envelope. City seal on the flap. Inside, an invitation. A community town hall, hosted by the police department, in the interest of reconciliation and transparency. Marcus stared at the words. They didn't mean much, not yet. But maybe they could. He RSVP'd. Yes. The event was held in the very district where he'd been cuffed. The flyer said dialogue. The whispers said damage control. He wore the same suit. Spoke last. The room was crowded with officers, organizers, pastors, teachers, and neighbors who never thought they'd sit at the same table. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply said, "We don't need more policies. We need memory. So that the next time you see someone like me, you don't wait for the badge. You recognize the person." And for once, the room didn't clap. It just nodded. Long, heavy. True. After the town hall, the department could no longer pretend nothing had happened. Internal Affairs launched an official investigation. Body cam footage was reviewed. Chain of command memos resurfaced. A quiet history of minor complaints about the arresting officer became impossible to ignore. But it wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about culture. About silence. About how many people had looked away because they didn't see themselves in the ones being stopped. Marcus declined the city's offer to co-author a reform memo. Instead, he submitted his own. It was short, precise. 3 pages. Perception protocols for preventing bias in first response encounters. Not just checklists. Not just vague phrases like community engagement. It included real directives. Officers must verify identification prior to physical detainment unless immediate threat is present. Mandatory quarterly racial bias refreshers taught outside the department. Civilian observers appointed to sit in on use of force reviews. The city council received it on Monday. By Wednesday, it had unanimous preliminary approval. But Marcus didn't celebrate. Instead, he returned to work. Day by day. Case by case. That week, he was set to prosecute a federal corruption case, high profile, full of media. But as he stood to give his opening statement, he saw something in the jury box that caught him off guard. A young black man. Shaved head. Posture tense. And in his lap, folded once, was a printed copy of Marcus's op-ed. The young man noticed Marcus notice. He gave the faintest nod. And Marcus? He spoke differently that day. Still firm. Still brilliant. But more grounded. Because now, the courtroom wasn't just for justice. It was a reminder. That one bad stop didn't define him. But what he did with it. That was legacy. The courtroom victory came quietly. Guilty on all counts. The defense barely blinked. Marcus gave a brief nod and stepped away from the podium like a man who had just set down a weight, only to pick up another one waiting outside the door. Because while justice had been served that day, something larger still pulsed beneath the surface. And Marcus knew it. Back at his office, he found a letter taped to his door. No return address. Just folded paper and careful, blocky handwriting. You don't know me, but I was the rookie on the scene that morning. I watched it all, and I said nothing. Not because I agreed. Because I froze. You weren't just calm, you were deliberate. That moment changed me. I've signed up for every de-escalation training available. I'm transferring precincts. Thank you for standing without screaming. Marcus sat with the letter for a long time. He didn't file it. Didn't toss it. He slid it into his responding box, tucked under a dozen others. Then he opened a new document. Title, What Training Never Taught Them. He wrote for an hour, maybe more. Reflections turned into blueprints, simple principles that didn't sound like policy, but like people. Respect, recognition, restraint. Things that couldn't be memorized. Only modeled. He submitted it to a law journal under a pen name. Not for secrecy, but because the message mattered more than the man. That night, he walked home. Same route. Same coffee shop. And when he reached the intersection where it had all started, where blue lights once washed his face in accusation, he paused. A mural had been painted on the side of the convenience store. It showed a man in a suit, standing tall, one hand holding a badge, the other open, not in defense, but in offering. And beneath it, 5 words. See the human. Every time. The mural became a landmark. Tour groups paused beside it. Teachers brought their students. Journalists added it to be roll footage for stories that tried to stretch 30 seconds into justice. But for Marcus, it wasn't a monument. It was a memory of restraint, of risk, of the razor-thin line between being believed and being buried beneath someone else's suspicion. He never claimed credit for the image. He didn't need to. The community had drawn their own conclusions and then painted them on a wall for the world to see. One morning, an older man waited outside Marcus's office. He wore a cap that said Korea Vet and held a folder tucked under his arm. "Sir," the man said, "I just wanted to shake your hand." Marcus extended his. "Why?" The man smiled gently. "Because you didn't make it about you. You made it about us." He handed Marcus the folder and walked away. Inside, a copy of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Highlighted, annotated, worn from years of being opened, folded, reread. On the first page, a note. "This law protected me. But your story reminded me that the law must be lived, not just written." Marcus kept the folder, pinned the letter above his desk. That week, he received an invitation to guest lecture at his old law school. He agreed, but only on one condition. No lectures, he told the dean. Just questions. From them. And so, he stood before a room of second years, sleeves rolled up, chalk in hand, and asked, "What do you think would have happened if I didn't have that badge?" No one answered at first. Then a student in the back raised her hand. "You'd be a statistic." Marcus nodded. "Exactly. So the real work? It's making sure no one has to carry a badge to be believed." That semester, the lecture became legend. It spread beyond campus. Clips of Marcus's Q&A went viral on platforms he didn't even use. In one, A student asked, "What gives you hope?" Marcus answered without pause. That people still ask that question, and that some of them are wearing uniforms when they do. Within weeks, he was invited to speak at a national criminal justice reform summit. He declined, not out of protest, but out of principle. He sent a letter instead, asking that his spot be filled by someone without a badge, without a title, without a name that opened courtroom doors. "Let someone speak," he wrote, "who doesn't get invited to rooms like this." They honored the request. A young organizer from Oakland took the stage in his place and ended her speech with a single line. "He gave me the mic. Now I'm giving it to you." Marcus watched the stream from his office. Didn't blink. Just listened. Because his story had never been meant to end with him. It was a baton, not a biography. And he was learning when to pass it. That week, he met with a group of public defenders who'd been inspired by his essay. They called themselves the Tally Table. A joke at first, now a real collaboration. They met once a month, over diner food and loose paper napkin notes, reviewing bias protocols, case law, and officer conduct trends. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. One night, a junior public defender leaned over and asked, "How do you stay calm after everything?" Marcus looked out the diner window. "Because I have to be. For the people who can't afford to be." He sipped his coffee. No cream. No sugar. Just sharp. Like truth. Fall brought a shift. In the air. In the tone of city council meetings. In the way officers approached people on the street. The ripples of Marcus's story, of his silence, his dignity, his refusal to collapse, had reached places even policy couldn't touch. And yet, Marcus remained in motion. He'd never wanted to become a symbol. Symbols get used. But he did want to be a compass. One that pointed toward accountability, no matter how quietly. That month, he returned to the precinct. Not as a victim. Not as a prosecutor. But as a guest. The new police chief, a black woman recently appointed after internal investigations upended the old regime, had invited him to speak during training week. She introduced him simply. "This man didn't raise his voice. So it's time we quiet ours and listen." Marcus stood before a room of rookies and veterans. Uniforms. Clean boots. Folded arms. He didn't lecture. He told a story. Not just about the day of the arrest, but about the pause. That moment between suspicion and recognition. That's where justice lives or dies. And it's built by seconds. Seconds you own. One officer shifted in his seat. Another stared at the floor. But one, just one, nodded slowly. That's who Marcus looked at. And when he finished, he added, "Don't remember my badge. Remember that I had to wear one to survive a stop. And don't fix that for me. Fix it for the ones who never had one." He stepped away from the podium. No applause. Just quiet. Just thought. And maybe, finally, understanding. Outside, the same cruiser sat idle near the curb. Same model. Same color. But something had changed. When Marcus passed by, the officer in the driver's seat looked up and nodded first. By the end of the year, the department had implemented sweeping changes. New training protocols. Mandatory bias intervention drills. A citizen oversight panel that included educators, activists, and yes, Marcus himself, though he never called attention to his seat at the table. He just showed up, took notes, asked questions others avoided. He wasn't interested in punishment. He was interested in prevention. Meanwhile, the arresting officer, whose name Marcus had never once spoken aloud, resigned quietly. No press release. No statement. Just a final report and a closed door. Marcus didn't cheer. He simply marked the date in his journal with a single line. Systems protect until they're forced to remember who they serve. In the months that followed, his influence expanded beyond city lines. Colleges requested him. Judges quoted him. Young black lawyers began citing his essay in their cover letters. He never stopped working his cases, never wanted to become someone who only talked about justice. He still showed up for trial. Still read files until midnight. Still walked the same route to court. And then, one day, something strange happened. A woman stopped him outside the courthouse. Middle-aged, hoodie pulled tight, tears forming before she spoke. "You prosecuted my son's case 3 years ago." Marcus braced for a memory. But she said something else. "You were fair. He didn't get off, but you didn't make him feel invisible." He didn't know what to say. So he nodded. And she said, "It matters. Even when it hurts. It matters." That night, he wrote 3 more pages in his journal. And one line stood out. "We don't heal justice by being loud. We heal it by being present when it's most uncomfortable to be." Then he closed the book. Because tomorrow would come. And justice wasn't finished. It was a clear Sunday morning when Marcus returned to the place where it all began. Same street corner. Same faded crosswalk paint. Same crooked stop sign that leaned like it had seen too much. This time, he wasn't alone. He stood beneath the light with a small group of community members, teachers, students, parents, pastors, and 2 officers in plain clothes. No podium. No live stream. Just folding chairs and honesty. The community forum had no agenda, no speeches, just a circle and a rule. Speak what you've carried in silence. A woman in scrubs spoke first. I was pulled over 6 months ago. No reason. Just a routine check. But it wasn't routine for me. It was a scar. An officer followed, his voice soft. I grew up here. I used to think people were exaggerating. Then I watched that video of Marcus. And it changed everything. Marcus sat in silence for most of it. Listening. Learning. Because that's what justice demands, not just action, but humility. When it was finally his turn, he stood, looked around the circle, and said, I'm not here to be remembered. I'm here to remind that justice doesn't need lights or badges to exist. It needs eyes that don't look away, and ears that don't turn off when the badge hits the ground. The circle nodded. Some cried. No one clapped, because applause fades. But truth lingers. As the forum ended, a little girl tugged his sleeve. She pointed at the mural across the street, the one with the man in the suit, holding the badge and the open hand. Is that really you? Marcus knelt beside her and smiled. It could be any of us.